There are two opposing philosophies about the ultimate nature of reality: the physical paradigm and the conscious paradigm, although you may have heard them referred to as materialism and idealism. Materialism is the notion that reality is purely physical, and it's a very common mode by which to look at reality, and it's easy to see why. It feels rational, objective, scientifically enlightened even, to be able to admit that physical matter and energy on a landscape of space and time is all there really is to existence. No spiritual, mystical, unfalsifiable, pseudo-religious notions of the immaterial. To think in a purely material way is the vantage point of science. To see the universe as an interconnected series of physical mechanisms. This framing of reality is the great assumption of science, necessarily. Science seeks to understand through measurement, and what cannot be physically measured either does not exist, or may as well not exist. When you dispel notions of spirits and supernatural occurrences, you're left with a universe made of matter. And it forces you to look at something you don't understand and say, it's just made of atoms with forces acting on it. There has to be a way that we can figure out how it works. To its credit, materialism is essentially responsible for all the scientific understanding and technological development humanity has ever produced. And yet, there is a problem with it. Materialism isn't true. There's a flaw in this mode of looking at reality. An error which is deceptively simple, yet profoundly important. There's a hidden truth that you can't see from the material paradigm. A truth you should notice about the nature of your existence, because recognizing this truth reconciles paradoxes and opens the gates to some of the deepest wisdom in the universe. Materialism, or what I sometimes call the material or physical paradigm, assumes that all phenomena in the universe are physical. In a sense, this is probably correct. Any observable phenomena within the universe are based upon the laws of physics. There are gaps in our physical models for phenomena we do not yet understand, but we needn't make those concerns relevant. I'm happy to assume here that a full understanding of the physical laws of the universe would explain all the mysterious phenomena in the universe in terms of physical systems. So what's the problem with the material paradigm? If all things are physical, how can there be an issue? Well, the issue is that there's one exception to that story: consciousness. Now, I'd like to be very careful here. Consciousness is a slippery subject. Over many millennia, countless individuals, very well-studied people, have had countless conversations about consciousness, where not only could they not strictly agree on what consciousness is, but with some regularity they seem to not even notice that they don't agree on what consciousness is. And when both of them naturally arrive at different conclusions about it, they both tend to be as confused as each other as to how they came to different conclusions. On the subject of consciousness, the vague meanings of certain terms and concepts can sort of sprawl over each other in a way that's really hard to understand and keep straight, so people talk past each other on this subject all the time. So let me try to be as clear as possible regarding the definitions I'll be using going forward. Consciousness is what it is like to be something. There's a possible experience associated with being a certain thing. For example, there is a possible experience associated with being a certain specific human being. The experience of being the thing is consciousness. Consciousness itself is made of what we might consider parts, the different perceptual fields that you have, the visual field, the auditory field, as well as the feeling of being a self, as well as being able to explore your own thoughts and feel emotions. We can sort of create a map of what it feels like to be a human being. It might look something like this. So, if this is consciousness, ask yourself, where is this located? If you conduct a scan of a human brain, or you dissect a cadaver, or you conduct brain surgery on a living person, you will see the inside of their brain, but you will not see any of these conscious structures. They're nowhere to be located in physical reality. If materialism is true, would we not expect to find consciousness somewhere? If you close your eyes and picture a green wall, the material paradigm would have you believe that the green you're imagining simply doesn't exist. Which seems impossible, because when you close your eyes and picture green, you aren't lying about seeing green. You can actually see it. So where is it? If you think this is a silly question, if it's, physically speaking, nowhere, then that means consciousness is non-physical. Despite its connection to physical brain activity, consciousness itself must be immaterial. Does that not prove the paradigm of materialism wrong? It seems that for the material paradigm to be correct, consciousness must not be real somehow. The idea of a purely physical world and the existence of consciousness appear mutually exclusive. Now, of these two objects, the physical universe and consciousness, you probably feel that the physical, objective, material reality is the most certain, the most solid. You can interact with the physical world constantly. You have a sense for how solid and certain it is, and that other people perceive it too. But that sense of physical reality being this solid, certain thing isn't really true. In fact, the reality is that you have never directly interacted with the physical world. Think about it. Consider what's happening when you look at something. Photons of light are emitted from a source object and bounce off another object, the one you're trying to look at. Some wavelengths are absorbed and others are reflected, giving the light bouncing off the object certain qualities that carry with it information about that object. Some of this reflected light comes into contact with the lens of your eye. From here, the light is directed towards your retina, a layer at the back of your eye coated with photosensitive cells. These absorb the light and convert it into a signal which is transmitted through the optic nerve into the visual cortex of your brain. The brain is a fundamentally computational structure. It lets the input signal propagate through neurosynaptic connections. Your brain does this for every sensory input, for sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, everything, allowing data received from each of your senses to ripple through the relevant neural circuits to let you know that you're experiencing something. The sensory input signals propagate in extraordinarily complex ways, interacting with other circuits that control things like your thoughts and voluntary motor functions and so on. All of this activity together integrates and synthesizes into a holistic experience of reality. Notice, however, that during this process, you never truly see the physical object. In fact, you never even see the light coming off of the object. We say you are your brain, right? Like, if we swapped yours and someone else's brains into each other's bodies and properly connected the nervous systems up again, we would expect your consciousness to follow the perspective of your brain. But when you see something, for example, just to pick one of the senses, that light never touches your brain. Your brain is enclosed within a perfectly dark skull. Unless you've had brain surgery at some point in your life, your brain has never directly experienced light. It's more true to say that when you look at an object, you internally hallucinate that you're looking at the object. Now, all your senses probably agree that there is an object there. If you're looking at a cup on a table, you experience the sensation of seeing the cup, but you can also experience touching the cup. You can tap on the side of it and hear the cup. Your senses can agree, but all of those inputs in the physical world, those things you might say are physically actually happening, are, at some point in the perceptual process, transmuted into signals, data that can be relayed through your nervous system and which is encoded in a format that can be processed by your brain and subsequently interpreted. and that is the only part of the process that you experience as consciousness. Every sense you have is being simultaneously hallucinated, just in a way that's quite firmly and reliably based on external inputs. Look around you, right now. What you see isn't literally what's there in the physical world. No part of your experience of consciousness is an experience of the physical world itself. You never make contact with the physical world. You're not directly observing physical reality. Your entire reality is an interpretation of the signals rippling through the inside of your own brain. Everything in your conscious awareness is entirely and solely representative of your own neural circuitry. It's just that the representation is consistent, so we assume that what we experience is identical to an assumed underlying physical world, and we just call that real. Here's another thing to consider. Our perceptions of reality do not necessarily match what we know to be physically taking place. For example, we know that light wavelengths are a linear phenomenon. They can be short or long, just like light can be bright or dim, or sound can be loud or soft, or high-pitched or low-pitched. These are all linear, one-dimensionally varying phenomena in physical reality. But specifically in the case of light wavelengths, we don't perceive them as a linear phenomenon. We perceive it as colour, and colour is cyclical. Imagine if we perceived sound in a way where you could perceive a sound so high-pitched that it sounded low-pitched, or if light looked so dim that it looked bright. It doesn't really make sense, but for whatever reason, our perceptual system, when dealing with light wavelengths, joins up long wavelength red and short wavelength blue with an intermediate colour we call purple, when both long and short wavelength light is being received by our eyes simultaneously. Why is our visual system like this? Who's to say? From an evolutionary perspective, it might have been advantageous somehow to see the colours as cyclical, or perhaps it's just a quirk of our colour perception which serves no real purpose. Yet it evidences that what we experience within consciousness is not even a literal interpretation of the underlying physical reality we assume exists. So if we approach this whole issue from an angle of assuming the paradigm of materialism is correct, and we work towards trying to understand what consciousness is, we find that consciousness seems to violate the principle of materialism, because there doesn't seem to be any possibility of consciousness existing as a physical object. Your fields of awareness do not literally exist in physical reality, and yet we know consciousness must exist because it's the vantage point from which we observe everything. And if we start from an assumption that consciousness is all there is, and gaze outwards towards the physical, we realize we never actually directly interact with the physical. We only infer its existence based on the contents of our consciousness. One could imagine a reality in which the conscious perspective is truly all that exists, and the existence of the physical world is merely an illusion within consciousness. Not in the sense that it's a simulation. It's not like the brain is locked in a vat and fed false stimuli. It would actually be that there is no vat, and there isn't even a brain. There's no physical reality at all. Only the one conscious first-person experience. That is what I call the conscious paradigm. It's the opposite of materialism. But if there isn't a physical reality, and your consciousness is all there is, why would you just happen to perceive a universe in the way that it is? Why would your completely ungrounded, untethered, effectively random perceptions be orderly enough to mimic the existence of a physical universe? Why would a total illusion obey laws of physics? Why wouldn't it just be filled with formless mist, or chaotic psychedelic patterns? Why would it form an illusory world populated with illusory beings that appear to physically resemble your own illusory mortal body? So, in exploring the material and the conscious paradigms, we ask about the nature of reality, and it seems there's problems with every answer. Unless there's another idea that we're yet to see. One would assume that either the physical or the conscious must be a primary phenomenon, from which the other emerges. Either creatures of matter attain consciousness, or consciousness hallucinates a physical world. Yet, the physical world alone cannot account for the existence of the conscious, and the conscious alone cannot account for the orderliness of the physical. But here's what we can tell. It's as though there are two entirely separate universes, one of which is a universe of the physical, made of rigidly defined and lawfully operating matter, but it exists in a way which can never be directly observed, in the cover of dark, never to be seen. And the other is a universe of fields of awareness, with their contents only representing a small part of the physical, but it allows the physical to take form. These two universes never, ever overlap. The representations within consciousness never enter the physical world, and the physical particles never enter the conscious world. This is to say, cutting open a brain doesn't literally show you consciousness, and observing your fields of awareness doesn't literally show you the physical world. The conscious and the physical are totally self-enclosed, yet when some event occurs within one, it seems to also be represented in the other. These two universes isn't really the right word, these two domains are tied together, consciously choose to perform a voluntary action, and matter in physical reality corresponds to this occurring. Likewise, if matter moves, that will be represented within the conscious realm as a perception in your experiential fields. And yet the physical and the conscious never actually intersect. They never come into direct contact. Isn't that weird? Of all the ways reality could work, isn't it so odd and kind of unnerving that what you conceptualize as this objective physical reality, beyond the subjectiveness of the observing individual, is really this peculiar veiled realm that you never ever get to see? Perhaps physical reality is almost like some cloud of potential data points that don't really have any qualities we could ever comprehend or describe outside of the process that filters that strange and unknowable alien landscape into consciousness. Consider that for a moment. You have no idea what the physical world actually looks like. In fact, if you really think about it, the physical world doesn't really look like anything. Looking like something is what it means for something to be consciously perceived with human-like visual perception. Physical objects don't actually look like, or sound like, or feel like anything in and of themselves. The act of conscious perception is what we mean by something having a quality that is actually comprehensible. Now, take it one more step. Perhaps the physical world is less like an actual world and more like a rulebook. Perhaps it's best conceptualized as the rules for what consciousness can display. In a way, that makes it easier to understand. It makes it easier to understand why there's no way for us to directly see it, because it isn't actually quite this physical, three-dimensional thing in the way you think it is. Perhaps the domain of the physical is actually formless, just a function that governs how consciousness is permitted to actualize itself from moment to moment, and the domain of consciousness just actualizes the formless rules into actual perceptions. Maybe neither the physical nor the conscious are primary. Neither one creates the other. Maybe they are simultaneous. Two necessary components of the thing we call reality. The physical dictates, and the conscious actualizes. I'll leave things there for today. There's plenty more to explore on this subject. I find that simple explanations are often the truest, but even as far as we've gotten in today's episode, there's still strange complexities woven throughout this explanation so far, so there's plenty more to untangle. Even if the answers to a riddle are ultimately simple, effort is still needed to reach the solution, not because the solution is complex, Rather, it's our misunderstandings that are complex. And small misunderstandings down at the base of the tree of logic grow out into realities filled with irreconcilable paradoxes. Realities where we can't tell where paradoxes are coming from. The only way to achieve resolution is to find truest ground and plant our tree anew. Let me know what you thought of this episode, and let me know what you think of this map of consciousness. To the extent that modelling consciousness even makes sense, I do not believe this representation is actually accurate, but pulling together an atlas of consciousness is something I'm going to have to leave for another time. Thank you once again for watching. Please leave a like on the video, share it around if you can, and subscribe to my channel. I massively appreciate you taking the time to listen. Every bit of engagement helps me tremendously. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.